Processing grief through symbolic encounters is one of the most complex, misunderstood, and deeply human experiences a person can go through. When someone is grieving, especially after losing a figure as central as a parent, the mind does not simply move on. Instead, it continues to process fragments of memory, longing, regret, unspoken conversations, and emotional echoes in ways that are not always linear or logical. These symbolic encounters, moments that feel supernatural, uncanny, or emotionally charged, are not signs of weakness or irrationality. They are the mind's sophisticated attempt to make sense of what the heart cannot fully bear. They invite us to slow down, reflect, and confront what we may have avoided for too long. Grief itself is not only about the loss of a person, it is about the loss of a role, a relationship, a sense of safety, and a version of oneself that existed while that person lived. When the mind generates a symbolic encounter, a voice calling your name, a dream so vivid it feels real, an imagined conversation, or the sense of a presence entering a room, it is not an illusion meant to frighten you. It is the emotional system using symbolic language to communicate something essential about your internal world. Human beings are storytellers by nature, and when we cannot articulate our pain directly, the psyche steps in and creates symbols that hold meaning. These symbolic encounters are especially common when there are unfinished emotional threads, things we did not say, apologies we hope to hear, comfort we still crave, or fears we never expressed. The mind does not produce these moments randomly. They emerge when a memory has been suppressed, when longing has been ignored, or when a painful truth has been locked away. The symbolic image becomes the bridge between what we consciously avoid and what we subconsciously still carry. Consider the experience of hearing a loved one's voice long after they have passed. To the logical part of the brain, this should be impossible. And yet, so many people, across cultures, languages, and beliefs, share this phenomenon. The voice often comes at moments of emotional vulnerability, late at night, during periods of stress, on significant anniversaries, or when someone is confronting a major life transition. What the mind is doing in these moments is not creating a haunting but initiating a form of emotional education. It is inviting the grieving person to acknowledge a feeling they have been resisting. Sometimes the symbolic encounter reflects longing, the deep desire to have one more moment with someone who shaped our life. Other times it reflects guilt, regret about things that were left unsaid or undone. In other instances, it reflects fear, the fear of losing connection, the fear of forgetting, or the fear of facing life without the person who once offered safety. In all cases, the symbolic encounter is a call to look inward. It is not the past returning, it is the present demanding to be felt fully. These moments also carry a profound psychological significance because grief often becomes fragmented. We may believe we have accepted a loss because we are functioning, going to work, fulfilling responsibilities, and appearing stable. But grief does not measure healing by what others see. It measures healing by what is acknowledged inside. And symbolic encounters arise precisely when grief recognizes that something important has been overlooked. The experience becomes a mirror, reflecting the emotional reality we have not wanted to face. Symbolic encounters are also shaped by the attachment we had with the person we lost. When a caregiver, especially a mother, passes away, the layers of grief are uniquely complex. A mother is often associated with warmth, safety, guidance, and unconditional presence. Losing a mother means losing the person who shaped your earliest understanding of comfort and belonging. So when the mind produces a symbolic encounter involving her voice or presence, it is often communicating that the individual is seeking grounding, reassurance, or emotional warmth at a time when they feel lost or uncertain. The symbolic message, such as "I'm cold" or "I'm here" or "come home," becomes an emotional metaphor. It is not about physical temperature or physical location. It is about the emotional state the grieving person is in. Feeling cold in symbolic grief often means feeling unprotected, emotionally numb, or disconnected. Opening a door in a symbolic encounter often represents opening oneself to memories, pain, or acceptance. Hearing a call late at night often represents an internal cry for attention to something that has been buried. Each symbolic detail carries a psychological meaning that points to the internal world of the grieving person. This is why symbolic encounters should never be dismissed as imagined or irrational. They are emotionally intelligent expressions of the subconscious mind. Another important aspect of symbolic encounters is that they allow people to reconnect with love in a way that is safe. The physical relationship with the lost person has ended, but the emotional relationship continues. This continuation is not unhealthy, it is natural. Humans maintain bonds with those they have lost through memory, ritual, internal dialogue, and symbolic images. When the psyche presents a symbolic encounter, it is often attempting to strengthen that internal bond or transform it into something that supports healing. For example, a person might dream of their mother telling them they are safe. Another may sense the presence of their father guiding them during a difficult decision. These moments offer emotional reassurance and invite the grieving person to consider how the love they received can still be carried forward. Symbolic encounters also highlight the way grief interacts with time. A loss that happened years ago can still feel immediate when certain triggers arise. A familiar scent, a piece of music, a holiday, or a milestone, like becoming a parent or facing an illness. The mind does not operate on a strict timeline when it comes to grief. Instead, it revisits certain emotional rooms when it knows there is unfinished processing. Symbolic encounters act as transitional spaces between the past and present, allowing the grieving person to integrate older memories into their current emotional life. When these symbolic encounters feel frightening, it is usually because they force the grieving person to confront something they are not ready to face. Fear does not arise from the encounter itself. It arises from the emotional truth hidden beneath it. For example, if a symbolic encounter occurs on a night when someone is feeling particularly alone, the mind may use the symbol of the lost loved one to highlight that loneliness. But because loneliness is painful to acknowledge, the encounter may be misinterpreted as something eerie or unsettling. The emotional educational opportunity lies in examining what the encounter represents rather than what it appears to be on the surface. This is why self-reflection becomes essential. When a symbolic encounter occurs, the deeper questions to ask include: what emotion was I suppressing? What memory did this evoke? What part of my life feels cold, empty, or unfinished? What does the symbol attempt to draw my attention toward? What am I afraid to acknowledge? Answering these questions helps transform the encounter from something mysterious or frightening into something meaningful and healing. Symbolic encounters are, in many ways, emotional invitations. They invite us to revisit memories with compassion, to forgive ourselves, to release guilt, to accept what cannot be changed, and to understand that love does not disappear simply because a person is gone. These encounters also highlight the importance of integrating grief rather than escaping it. Avoiding grief often leads to emotional stagnation. People may become numb, irritable, or disconnected. They may feel stuck in one chapter of life without understanding why. Symbolic encounters disrupt this stagnation. They shake the emotional system awake and say, "Pay attention. Something inside you needs care." They remind us that grief is not a wound to hide but a story to understand. One of the most profound aspects of symbolic encounters is that they allow the grieving person to participate in unfinished conversations that never happened in life. The mind may create a moment in which the lost loved one expresses warmth, forgiveness, reassurance, or longing. These symbolic dialogues allow the grieving person to emotionally complete what life did not allow them to finish. The symbolic version of the lost loved one becomes a teacher, offering insights into the grieving person's inner world. At a deeper level, these symbolic encounters demonstrate that grief is not only about pain, it is also about connection. The fact that a symbolic image or voice can evoke such strong emotion means that the bond was meaningful. Instead of seeing these encounters as disturbing, they can be reframed as reminders of love that shaped us, love that remains with us, and love that continues to teach us long after the physical presence is gone. Ultimately, processing grief through symbolic encounters means learning to understand your emotional system rather than fearing it. It means recognizing that the mind communicates symbolically when direct dialogue is too painful. It means realizing that a symbolic moment is not a regression but an opportunity, a chance to deepen self-awareness, integrate emotional truth, and move toward healing with intention rather than avoidance. These encounters invite you to open doors you have kept locked. They invite you to warm the cold parts of your memory. They invite you to acknowledge that healing does not require forgetting, it requires understanding. And in understanding, the symbolic becomes not a mystery but a path toward clarity, acceptance, and emotional wholeness. Emotional memory as a teacher is one of the most profound and underrated aspects of the human experience, especially when it comes to grief, love, and long-term inner healing. When someone we have lost suddenly reappears in our imagination, whether through a vivid dream, a spontaneous mental image, or even an emotional flashback, the experience can feel startlingly real. These moments are not random. They are not insignificant. They are messages from the emotional system that something inside us needs attention, compassion, or understanding. Emotional memory does not communicate through logical arguments or structured sentences. It communicates through sensations, images, fragments of voices, and reenactments of moments we thought we had buried. These internal appearances of the deceased are not simply nostalgia or wishful thinking. They are psychological signals that we are in a moment of vulnerability, overwhelm, or transformation. Many people misunderstand emotional memory. They assume that once someone dies, the emotional connection dissolves and that healthy grieving means suppressing or moving on from that person. In reality, the bond moves into a different form. It shifts from external interaction to internal relationship. The person becomes part of our internal narrative system, part of our emotional architecture, part of the way we make meaning out of life. When emotional memory brings that person back into your awareness, sometimes unexpectedly, it is often because the psyche recognizes that this internal relationship holds wisdom, comfort, or clarity that you currently need. These vivid internal encounters tend to occur in moments when your emotional capacity is stretched thin, when you are exhausted, overwhelmed, lonely, or navigating a life transition. The internal world seeks anchors. It seeks figures who once offered safety, warmth, guidance, or stability. Emotional memory is not only a way of remembering, it is a way of self-regulating, of grounding, of soothing. The appearance of a loved one inside your mind may be your emotional system, trying to place you back into an experience where you once felt protected. The mind remembers not only what happened but how you felt, and it replays those emotional states when it senses you need them. This internal reappearance is also connected to the concept of emotional imprinting. Every meaningful relationship leaves behind impressions, patterns of comfort, language, affection, conflict resolution, safety, and connection. These impressions do not fade with time. They remain woven into our emotional identity. If your mother comforted you in a certain tone, your mind can reproduce that tone decades later. If your father taught you a lesson during a moment of fear, that moment becomes encoded into your emotional reflexes. Emotional memory, then, is not fictional. It is a form of stored emotional intelligence. When someone appears vividly in your mind, your emotional system is drawing from these stored patterns to guide you. The mistake many people make is dismissing these internal encounters as hallucinations, irrational clinginess, or signs of emotional instability. In truth, they are one of the most important therapeutic mechanisms built into the human experience. Emotional memory is how the psyche teaches us, heals us, and holds us together. It brings forward the figures from our past whose emotional presence had meaning. It resurrects specific moments that our present self can learn from. It allows us to revisit experiences that shaped us so we can reinterpret them with the maturity, insight, or self-awareness we have today. When emotional memory surfaces, it often reveals layers of grief we didn't know we were still carrying. Grief doesn't disappear on a timetable. It shifts, resurfaces, retreats, and transforms. Sometimes we believe we have resolved a loss simply because enough time has passed or because we have become functional again. But emotional memory sees beyond functionality. It knows when a part of us is still hurting. It knows when a certain insecurity, fear, or longing is connected to the unresolved aspects of loss, and so it brings back the image of the person who symbolizes those unresolved threads. The vividness of the memory is a signal that the emotional system wants us to pay attention. There is also an important educational dimension to emotional memory. When someone reappears in your internal world, your mind might be trying to teach you something about how that relationship shaped your emotional patterns. For example, if your lost loved one was someone you turned to for validation, their sudden reappearance may indicate that you are currently doubting yourself. If they were someone who made you feel safe, their internal presence may mean you are navigating a period of uncertainty. If they were someone with whom you had unresolved conflict, their vivid return may be inviting you to explore old wounds that still influence your behavior today. This teaching process often occurs subconsciously. You may have a dream where the person stands beside you silently. Or you might hear them call your name in that familiar tone. Or you may see them in a memory so clear it feels like it is happening in the present. These experiences are emotionally instructive not because of what the person literally says or does, but because of what their presence symbolizes within your internal emotional landscape. The emotional system communicates in symbols because symbols allow us to feel, process, and understand things that would overwhelm us if communicated directly. Emotional memory also teaches us how deeply love continues to shape our perception of the world long after the loved one is gone. Love is not confined to the physical presence of the person. We internalize love. We carry it with us. We repeat it in our relationships, our choices, our values, our fears, and our desires. When someone loved us deeply, their emotional fingerprint remains on our psyche. When we loved someone deeply, our longing for them becomes part of our inner narrative. The mind does not separate love into past and present. For the emotional system, love is timeless. It remains active, alive, and influential. Hence, the internal appearance of a loved one is often a reminder that love still lives inside you and that the relationship continues to shape you in meaningful ways. There is also a protective dimension to emotional memory. Sometimes the loved one appears internally during moments of danger, confusion, or emotional fragility. Their presence functions as a psychological guardian. It restores balance. It calms the nervous system. It provides a sense of continuity and identity. This is not fantasy. It is a neurobiological reality. The brain, when emotionally overwhelmed, retrieves memories associated with safety and grounding. If the lost loved one was a source of protection, the mind recalls them in moments of vulnerability as a way of stabilizing itself. This is why the memory often feels so vivid. It is activated with emotional urgency. Another important aspect of emotional memory as a teacher is the way it brings back lessons we once learned but may have forgotten. A mother's advice, a father's warning, a partner's comforting words, these become part of the emotional memory bank. When the psyche senses that a past lesson is relevant to a current challenge, it replays the memory. It can come back through a dream, a sudden recollection, or even a moment that feels like hearing the person's voice again. This is not the supernatural speaking, it is the subconscious mind recalling wisdom that the conscious mind has overlooked. Emotional memory also invites us to confront unresolved truths. If the relationship with the lost loved one was complicated, their internal reappearance may bring up feelings of guilt, regret, or unfinished emotional business. This is not punishment, it is an invitation to emotional maturation. Emotional memory gives us the chance to examine dynamics we once avoided. It encourages us to accept our imperfections, to forgive ourselves for past mistakes, and to see the relationship in a more compassionate, nuanced light. The person's internal presence becomes a mirror reflecting the emotional work we still need to do. This reflective process can be painful, but it is profoundly transformative. When emotional memory brings up difficult moments from the past, it is not to reopen the wound, it is to give us the chance to heal it properly. Often the younger version of ourselves responded to emotional pain with avoidance, denial, or shame. The adult version of ourselves is more capable of understanding, accepting, and learning. Emotional memory provides the bridge between who we were during the trauma and who we are now. When a lost loved one appears vividly in your internal world, they are often representing the part of you that needs emotional integration. Another dimension of emotional memory as a teacher lies in how it reveals the continuing influence of the lost loved one on our identity. People shape us through their presence, their words, their behaviors, their values, and their emotional energy. When they are gone, those influences do not disappear. They become part of the fabric of who we are. When emotional memory brings them back, it is often reminding us of who we became because of them. It may remind us of our strengths, our resilience, our compassion, our courage, or our vulnerabilities. It may remind us of what they taught us directly or what we learned indirectly through observation. Emotional memory acts as a connector between the past that shaped us and the present that still holds their imprint. These internal appearances also reveal the way emotional memory stores longing. Longing is not simply missing someone, it is the emotional recognition that the person fulfilled a need that still exists. The need for comfort, the need for understanding, the need for stability, the need for love. When emotional memory brings the loved one back, it is often highlighting that these needs have resurfaced. Instead of suppressing the longing, exploring it allows us to understand what aspect of our emotional life requires attention in the present. Emotional memory also plays an important role in how we construct meaning out of loss. The initial shock of losing someone often leaves us emotionally fragmented. Over time, the mind begins weaving memories into narratives. These narratives help us understand what the relationship meant, how it shaped us, and how we can continue living in a way that honors the connection. Emotional memory contributes to this meaning-making process by offering pieces of the emotional puzzle. Each vivid appearance, each recalled moment, each symbolic dream adds another layer of understanding. The internal presence of the loved one becomes part of a story, not a fantasy story, but an emotional truth story. It is also essential to understand that emotional memory does not operate in a linear timeline. A memory from years ago can suddenly feel immediate if it resonates with a current emotional situation. This can be confusing because the emotional intensity may not match the present circumstances, but emotional memory responds to emotional similarity, not chronological order. If the emotional state you are experiencing now resembles the emotional state you had during a particular moment with the loved one, the mind retrieves that memory because it holds relevance. This retrieval is not accidental, it is instructional. Another important aspect is that emotional memory does not always replicate events accurately. Instead, it reconstructs them based on emotional significance. This means that the version of the loved one that appears in your internal world is not a literal replay of who they were. It is the emotional essence of who they were to you. This essence is what the psyche uses to teach, comfort, protect, or guide you. Understanding this allows you to interpret emotional memory, not as confusion, but as symbolic communication. Emotional memory also teaches us the complexity of love. Love is not static, it changes shape depending on our emotional needs. When the loved one appears in your internal world, it is often because your emotional system is revisiting a form of love that once supported you. This highlights the way love continues to evolve even in the absence of the physical person. Their internal presence may shift depending on what you need, sometimes comforting, sometimes challenging, sometimes reminding, sometimes soothing. There is a therapeutic value in welcoming emotional memory instead of suppressing it. When you allow the internal presence of the loved one to emerge without fear or judgment, you gain access to a deeper understanding of your emotional landscape. You begin to see patterns when they appear, what emotions are triggered, what memories surface, and what unmet needs become visible. This awareness helps you navigate your emotional life with greater clarity and compassion. Emotional memory can also teach us about resilience, The vivid reappearance of a loved one can remind us that we have survived their loss, that we have carried their love forward, and that we are capable of finding meaning even in absence. It shows us that grief does not erase connection, it transforms it. This transformation is part of the emotional education that allows us to grow through loss rather than be diminished by it. In many cases, emotional memory also helps us reconnect with our own humanity. When we remember the loved one vividly, we feel the full spectrum of emotions: sadness, love, longing, gratitude, regret, hope. These emotions remind us that we are alive, that we are capable of deep connection, that we have felt love strongly enough for it to leave a lasting imprint. Emotional memory humanizes us by reminding us of our emotional depth. Finally, emotional memory teaches us how to integrate the past and present in a healthy way. The internal reappearance of a loved one is not meant to pull us backward, but to guide us forward. It is a form of inner wisdom, a way the psyche helps us carry the love, lessons, and emotional truths of the past into the evolving reality of our lives. By exploring these internal encounters instead of dismissing them, we gain insight into what still hurts, what still matters, and what still needs healing. We also recognize that the people we lose never fully leave us. They continue to shape our emotional world, guide our choices, and influence the person we are becoming. Emotional memory, therefore, is not simply memory. It is a teacher, one that uses the language of imagery, sensation, and symbolic presence to help us understand ourselves more deeply. It invites us to grow, to reflect, to heal, and to carry forward the love that once shaped us. It teaches us that even in loss, connection remains. Even in absence, presence continues. And even in grief, love endures, guiding us toward emotional wholeness. Avoiding grief doesn't erase it, it buries it, and buried emotions do not stay silent forever. They resurface in ways we don't expect, at moments we don't choose, and through symbols we don't always understand. The importance of acknowledging suppressed feelings becomes clear when the mind, unable to hold the weight of unprocessed pain any longer, begins to create vivid scenarios, dreams, or auditory impressions that seem to come from somewhere beyond the conscious mind. These experiences can feel mysterious, unsettling, or even supernatural, but at their core they are psychological communications. They are emotional messages delivered through the only channel strong enough to break through our avoidance. Grief has a voice. When we ignore it, that voice does not fall silent. It becomes louder in more symbolic and indirect ways. The human emotional system is designed for integration, not suppression. Every emotion we avoid, sadness, anger, longing, guilt, regret, remains stored within us, waiting for acknowledgement. Suppressed feelings behave like pressurized water. They seep through the cracks of our daily life when we are tired, stressed, or vulnerable. They appear in dreams that feel too real to dismiss. They echo in imagined voices. They replay in intrusive memories. They rise up during quiet moments when our defenses are down. And often these manifestations are not random. They are crafted by the psyche to draw our attention towards something we have not yet faced. The mind does not create vivid scenarios without reason. It uses intensity to highlight emotional urgency. If someone dreams of a lost loved one knocking on the door or calling their name, the deeper message is not about the literal event. It is about the emotional truth beneath it. A knocking door in a dream may represent emotions locked away. A cold voice may symbolize neglected pain. A call in the middle of the night may reflect inner turmoil surfacing at a time when the mind is unguarded. These symbolic presentations are the psyche's way of saying, there is something here that needs your attention. The intensity of these encounters mirrors the intensity of the feelings we have suppressed. People suppress grief for many reasons. Some suppress it because the world around them expects strength, composure, or moving on. Some suppress it because facing the pain feels overwhelming or frightening. Others avoid grief because they don't know how to process it, or because they were never taught the emotional vocabulary needed to navigate loss. Many people carry cultural or familial messages that discourage emotional expression. Don't cry, be strong, focus on the living, time heals everything. These messages often teach emotional silence rather than emotional resilience. But grief does not respond to silence. It responds to acknowledgement. Suppressed grief transforms into emotional weight. It leaks into daily life as irritation, fatigue, numbness, anxiety, restlessness, or sudden emotional outbursts. It affects concentration and sleep. It slows down motivation. It alters relationships. It shapes how we see ourselves. And because the person suppressing these feelings believes they are functioning normally, they are often confused by these symptoms. The mind, however, understands exactly what is happening, and it does everything in its power to bring the suppressed feelings to the surface. This is where emotional imagery becomes educational. When the mind feels ignored, it becomes creative. It dramatizes internal conflict in ways that we cannot overlook. A vivid dream of a lost mother standing in the hallway, a sensation of someone calling your name, or a sudden flashback to moments you haven't thought about in years. These are emotional interventions. They are psychological invitations to pause, look inward, and face the truth of what you are feeling. Acknowledging suppressed grief is not only important, it is essential for psychological well-being. When grief is unprocessed, it becomes frozen. Frozen grief does not disappear with time. It becomes stored as emotional tension, unresolved longing, or chronic sorrow. Some people carry unacknowledged grief for years, even decades, without realizing its influence. They may think they are simply tired or emotionally distant. They may believe they have personality traits that are actually the long-term effects of avoidance. But emotional systems are wise. They seek resolution. And when we ignore emotional truth, it often returns through symbolic imagery, because symbolism allows the psyche to bypass the defenses of logic. Dreams, in particular, are one of the safest places for suppressed emotions to surface. During sleep, the rational mind relaxes, and the emotional mind becomes more expressive. The barrier between conscious and subconscious dissolves, allowing intense emotions to communicate in metaphorical language. A dream of a deceased loved one asking for help may reflect your own internal need for emotional assistance. A dream of someone saying they are cold may represent parts of yourself that have been emotionally neglected. These dreams are not meant to cause distress. They are meant to break through avoidance. Auditory impressions, like hearing a familiar voice, can occur during moments of emotional overload. When the nervous system reaches a point of exhaustion, the brain may access deeply stored emotional memories. These memories can replay with such clarity that they feel external. The voice itself is not supernatural, it is a memory encoded with emotional resonance. The mind brings it to the surface because some part of you needs to reconnect with an emotion associated with that person: comfort, safety, guidance, or closure. Acknowledging suppressed feelings requires courage. It requires willingness to sit with discomfort and to explore emotions that may feel raw or painful. But it is through this acknowledgement that healing begins. The moment you recognize that your emotional system is trying to communicate with you, not scare you, not confuse you, but teach you, you begin to see these vivid encounters not as disturbances, but as opportunities for emotional insight. Reflection is an essential part of this process. When the mind presents a symbolic encounter, the first step is not to interpret it literally, but emotionally. Ask yourself what feeling the encounter evokes. Does it bring sadness, fear, longing, guilt, or confusion? These emotional reactions are clues. They guide you toward the underlying truth. For example, if a dream of your mother asking to be let inside leaves you feeling anxious, the deeper emotion may be fear of vulnerability. If it leaves you feeling sorrowful, the deeper emotion may be unresolved longing. If it leaves you feeling unsettled, it may point to guilt or regret. The intensity of the encounter reflects the intensity of the underlying feeling. These emotional signals are not punishments, they are invitations. They remind us that healing requires participation. The mind cannot complete the emotional process without the conscious self engaging with it. Pausing to reflect allows you to translate symbolic experiences into emotional insight. This shift, from avoidance to awareness, creates space for healing. Grief does not ask for perfection, it asks for honesty. Acknowledging suppressed feelings also helps prevent emotional displacement. When we refuse to face grief, the emotion does not disappear. It simply relocates. It may attach itself to unrelated stress, causing overreactions. It may manifest as anger toward loved ones. It may transform into anxiety about the future. It may express itself through physical symptoms such as headaches, tension, or fatigue. Emotional displacement obscures the true source of pain, making healing more complicated. The mind counteracts this confusion by bringing the true source forward through symbolic encounters. Another reason acknowledging suppressed feelings is crucial is because unprocessed grief distorts memory. When we avoid facing the pain of a loss, our memories of the person become filtered through fear or denial. We may idealize them unrealistically, or we may distance ourselves emotionally to avoid pain. Both distortions prevent authentic connection with the memory of the person we have lost. By acknowledging suppressed emotions, we allow ourselves to remember the person honestly, with love, complexity, and clarity. Acknowledgement also restores emotional movement. When grief is suppressed, emotions become stagnant. They stop evolving. But when we face these feelings, they begin to flow again. This movement is essential because emotional healing is a dynamic process. Feelings must be felt, expressed, examined, understood, and integrated. Suppression freezes the process, acknowledgement reactivates it. This reactivation often brings a sense of relief, even if the initial confrontation is painful. Many people describe the moment they finally acknowledge their grief as a release, a softening, or a lifting of emotional pressure. This is because the emotional system no longer needs to create intense symbolic scenarios to communicate. The message has been received. Once you consciously engage with your suppressed feelings, the mind can transition from symbolic communication to emotional processing. Acceptance emerges gradually. It is not a single moment but a series of realizations. Acceptance does not mean forgetting the person, minimizing the loss, or erasing the past. It means integrating the emotional truth into your present reality. It means recognizing that grief and love coexist. It means allowing yourself to feel without fear of being overwhelmed. It means giving yourself permission to remember without collapsing. Acknowledging suppressed feelings also strengthens emotional intelligence. It helps you become more aware of your internal world, more capable of recognizing emotional signals, and more skilled at expressing what you feel. This emotional literacy extends beyond grief. It influences relationships, decision-making, boundaries, communication, and self-understanding. When you learn to listen to grief, you learn to listen to yourself. Furthermore, facing suppressed feelings deepens your connection to the person you lost. Instead of blocking out the pain, you make space for the relationship to continue internally. This internal relationship is not an unhealthy attachment, it is a natural evolution of love. Acknowledging grief allows the memory of the person to become a source of insight, comfort, and emotional grounding. It transforms their presence from something haunting to something guiding. Suppressed feelings also often contain hidden wisdom. When we avoid pain, we often overlook the lessons embedded within it. Grief teaches us about vulnerability, love, impermanence, strength, and emotional depth. It teaches us what matters and what does not. It clarifies priorities. It reveals resilience. But these lessons only emerge when we face grief directly. Avoidance blocks both the pain and the wisdom. Acknowledgement opens the door to both. The process of acknowledging suppressed emotions also helps heal identity fractures that often occur after loss. Losing someone significant can create a sense of disorientation. You may feel like a part of you has disappeared. You may question who you are without them. You may feel suspended between old versions of yourself and the new reality you are forced to face. When you suppress grief, these identity fractures remain unresolved. But when you engage with your emotions honestly, you begin rebuilding a coherent sense of self. You learn who you are now, who you are becoming, and how the love and lessons of the lost person continue to shape you. Acknowledging suppressed feelings also enables forgiveness, both of yourself and the person you lost. Many people carry guilt, regrets, or unresolved conflicts that become locked inside when they avoid grief. Facing these emotions allows you to confront the reality of the relationship with compassion. You begin to see the limitations and strengths of both yourself and the other person. This clarity makes forgiveness possible. Forgiveness is not forgetting, it is releasing the emotional burden that prevents healing. One of the most important aspects of acknowledging suppressed feelings is that it reclaims emotional autonomy. When you suppress emotions, you become controlled by them indirectly. They shape your behavior, thoughts, and responses without your awareness. But when you acknowledge them, you regain agency. You become an active participant in your emotional life rather than a passive recipient. This shift from unconscious influence to conscious awareness is transformative. Another essential dimension is that acknowledging grief strengthens resilience. True resilience does not come from suppressing emotions. It comes from facing them, surviving them, and integrating them. When you acknowledge your suppressed feelings, you build emotional endurance. You develop trust in your ability to handle difficult emotions. You learn that pain does not destroy you, it teaches you. Acknowledgement also deepens empathy. When you face your own grief, you become more attuned to the grief of others. You begin to understand the fragility and depth of the human emotional experience. You become more compassionate, more patient, and more emotionally present. This enhances your relationships and your ability to connect authentically with others. Emotional acknowledgement, therefore, not only heals you, it expands your humanity. When we avoid grief, we also avoid love. Because love and grief are intertwined, suppressing one means numbing the other. People who suppress grief often find it difficult to experience deep joy, connection, or intimacy. By acknowledging suppressed grief, you reopen the emotional channels that allow love to flow. You reclaim the ability to feel deeply, not only the pain of loss but the beauty of life. This emotional openness enriches your inner world and your relationships. Ultimately, acknowledging suppressed feelings transforms the way you carry grief. Instead of being a heavy weight that drags you into emotional darkness, grief becomes a source of understanding, connection, and emotional maturity. The symbolic encounters created by the mind, whether through dreams, vivid imagery, or auditory impressions, are not signs of weakness, instability, or confusion. They are signs of emotional intelligence seeking expression. They are invitations to face what has been ignored. Healing begins the moment you stop running from these emotional messages and start listening to them. When you pause to reflect instead of dismissing the experience, you shift from avoidance to acceptance. Acceptance does not mean the absence of pain. It means the absence of resistance. It means allowing the truth to be felt, heard, and integrated. It means giving yourself permission to mourn, remember, and heal at your own pace. In acknowledging suppressed feelings, you allow grief to complete its natural process. You give yourself the emotional freedom to grow. You transform symbolic pain into conscious healing. You reclaim your emotional life, and in doing so, you honor not only the person you lost, but the person you are becoming. Reframing fear into meaning is one of the most transformative emotional skills a grieving person can develop, and it often begins with an experience that startles, confuses, or unsettles the mind. When someone encounters a moment that feels eerie, such as hearing a familiar voice, sensing a presence, or vividly imagining a loved one long after their passing, the instinctive reaction is often fear. The surprise shocks the nervous system. The brain searches for explanations. The heart reacts before the mind has time to reflect. But beneath that fear lies a deeper emotional message, one that is not meant to frighten, but to illuminate. These encounters, symbolic or internal, challenge us to rethink what our emotional systems are trying to express and how grief continues to evolve long after the immediate pain of loss has faded. Fear in these moments rarely comes from the encounter itself. More often, it comes from what the encounter represents: a connection we still hold, a feeling we have not resolved, or a part of the self that remains uncertain about how to navigate life without someone who mattered profoundly. When something emotional rises unexpectedly, especially in a form that resembles the loved one we've lost, the mind momentarily loses its grounding. Yet the very intensity of that reaction reveals the significance of the emotional signal being triggered. Fear becomes a messenger, pointing towards something important inside us that has not yet been understood. To reframe fear into meaning, we must first understand the role that fear plays in grief. Fear often masks vulnerability. It arises when emotions become too powerful to process comfortably. When a symbolic encounter occurs, such as the feeling of being watched, the memory of a voice, or an imagined request from someone who has passed, the emotional system reacts with alarm because it perceives unpredictability. The familiar person appearing in an unfamiliar way disrupts expectations. The mind, always seeking safety and consistency, interprets this disruption as something to fear. But the disruption is not dangerous. It is emotional insight breaking through the surface. This is why curiosity becomes an essential tool in transforming fear. Instead of shutting down, resisting, or trying to erase the experience, approaching it with curiosity allows us to ask deeper questions. Why did this moment arise now? What part of me needed to remember this person? What emotion was awakened? Sadness, longing, guilt, comfort, or unresolved fear? Curiosity softens the edges of fear, allowing us to examine the symbolic message without feeling threatened by it. When a loved one who has passed appears vividly in our internal world, the encounter often carries emotional symbolism rather than literal meaning. The symbolic message might relate to something unresolved, a question we still hold, a memory we have tried to bury, or a part of our identity that was shaped by the person we lost. In this context, fear becomes a signal that a deeper emotional layer has been activated. If we treat the fear as a warning, we miss the opportunity. But if we treat the fear as a doorway, we open ourselves to understanding our emotional life in a more nuanced way. Reframing fear also requires acknowledging that human beings often misinterpret emotional intensity as danger. Strong emotions feel overwhelming. The body reacts physically, heart racing, breath shortening, mind becoming alert. These reactions are often mistaken for a threat, when in reality they are signs of emotional activation. When grief resurfaces unexpectedly, the physical body reacts as though something external is happening, but the true source lies within. By understanding this distinction, we create space to respond with awareness rather than panic. It is important to remember that grief does not operate on a fixed timeline. Even years after a loss, emotional memories can return with vivid force, especially when triggered by stress, loneliness, transitions, anniversaries, or unresolved emotions. When these memories take on symbolic or sensory form, it does not mean something supernatural is occurring. It means something emotional is occurring. The appearance of a loved one in a dream, a voice, an imagined scenario, or a symbolic moment is the mind's way of revisiting an emotional truth that still needs attention. The fear that accompanies this experience is often the fear of feeling the full weight of that truth. Many people feel ashamed or embarrassed when they experience something that seems unusual or emotionally charged. They worry that it means they are stuck, losing control, or imagining things. But in reality, these moments demonstrate emotional intelligence rather than dysfunction. The mind is using symbolic language to communicate something complex. Instead of minimizing the experience, interpreting it with compassion allows us to view it as part of an ongoing relationship we hold with the person who has passed. The relationship does not end with death, it transforms. The grief becomes a form of continuing connection, and the symbolic encounter becomes a form of emotional dialogue. Reframing fear into meaning also helps us shift from seeing these encounters as frightening intrusions to seeing them as emotional reminders. A reminder of love that shaped us. A reminder of parts of ourselves that were shaped by that person. A reminder of the emotional resilience we are still building. In this way, the experience becomes an educational moment, one that teaches us about who we are now, how we carry memory, and how grief continues to interact with our identity. When symbolic encounters occur, they are often tied to emotional states we have not acknowledged. Feeling overwhelmed, lonely, uncertain, or disconnected can activate memories associated with comfort and security. For many people, especially those who lost a parent, the symbolic presence of that parent represents warmth, protection, and grounding. When these qualities are missing in the present, the emotional system looks for them in memory. The sudden reappearance of that symbolic memory may feel frightening at first, but when examined closely, it reveals exactly what we are emotionally craving. The meaning lies not in the encounter itself, but in the emotional need beneath it. Another aspect of reframing fear into meaning involves recognizing that these symbolic moments do not emerge randomly. They arise at times of emotional threshold, when we are transitioning, grieving, questioning, or confronting something significant. They serve as internal checkpoints that ask us to reflect: what am I carrying right now? What am I afraid to admit? What part of me needs comfort, guidance, or grounding? What unresolved emotion is surfacing? How does this memory help me understand what I'm experiencing today? This reflective process transforms fear into insight. Instead of avoiding the experience, we engage with it, allowing the emotional lesson to reveal itself. When we do this, the symbolic encounter becomes less threatening and more familiar, an internal gesture of connection rather than a source of fear. Over time, as we repeatedly reinterpret these moments through the lens of meaning rather than fear, we build emotional resilience. We learn that emotional intensity does not equal danger. We learn that grief is not something to suppress, but something to understand. We learn that the emotional connection with someone who has passed is not a haunting, it is a remembrance. And remembrance is an act of love, not fear. Reframing fear into meaning also allows us to expand how we think about ongoing relationships with loved ones who are gone. Instead of seeing their absence as a void, we begin to see their influence as a continued presence within us. Their lessons, values, and emotional imprints continue shaping our decisions, our identities, and our emotional responses. The symbolic encounter becomes evidence that the relationship still matters, emotionally, psychologically, and symbolically. The fear dissolves when we recognize that these moments are not about the presence of the loved one. They are about the presence of their impact. This understanding empowers us to transform moments that once frightened us into moments that guide us. What felt like an intrusion becomes an invitation. What felt like a threat becomes insight. What felt like a ghost becomes a memory. And what felt unsettling becomes meaningful. We learn to recognize that the emotional system communicates in symbols when words fail. When we honor those symbols, we deepen our self-awareness and strengthen our emotional health. Ultimately, reframing fear into meaning is an act of emotional maturity. It is the willingness to look at the uncomfortable, the mysterious, the overwhelming, and see not danger but depth. It is the ability to interpret emotional signals as guidance rather than threats. It is the practice of transforming the unknown into knowledge, the frightening into familiar, and the symbolic into significant. In this way, moments that once terrified us become moments that teach us. They remind us that grief is not an enemy, it is a companion. A companion that speaks not to scare us, but to guide us toward understanding, acceptance, and emotional integration. And when we learn to listen, not with fear but with curiosity, we discover that every symbolic encounter, no matter how unsettling, contains a message meant to help us grow. Through that growth, the ongoing relationship with those who have passed becomes not a source of fear, but a source of meaning.